Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cracking Addiction. My name's Dr. Ferghal Armstrong, and we have with us Dr. Richard Bradlow. So, Richard, I thought today we'd talk about resilience, and really, it's such a huge subject that I think we'll just really divide it into a number of sessions. So, first of all, how do we define resilience in the context of AOD? What would be your way of explaining what it is?
Sure. So thank you very much for having me on today, Fergal. I guess how I think about resilience in an addiction and in a mental health concept is the ability to bounce back and tolerate hardships. So
Yeah.
hardships, unfortunately, are an inevitable part of life, and how we respond to
Mm.
them is a lot of how we measure who we are as people. And resilience in a health setting, in a mental health setting, is how quickly we bounce back from the slings and arrows that life deals at us. In a substance use setting, it's how do we deal with those stresses whilst we're in recovery, and how do we respond to cravings and stresses, or stresses that would lead to cravings that could bring about a relapse.
Absolutely. I appreciate the Shakespearean author in you, the slings and arrows of adversity. But it's a very valid
That is,
point.
my mother was a year 12, is a year 12 English teacher, Fergal, so I can
All right,
suffer
okay.
the slings of arrows of life, or
But
take
it's
arms
very
against a
good.
sea of troubles.
Oh, well, right. You made your point. Right. But it's a very important point that we, as much as we would like to, we don't have a pill that can protect people from life. The only thing we can do is help people deal with life. And when we're thinking about the AOD context, I think I like to think of managing both the impulsivity around AOD and also the compulsivity around AOD. So by that I mean, if we're thinking about alcohol use disorder, for instance, we give drugs like naltrexone, which take away the fun of drinking, basically. So there's no more buzz, right? And so that removes the impulsive fun. But then you're left behind with what I call the compulsive need to drink, because no one developed a substance use disorder out of the blue. There's always an underlying reason why a substance, be it alcohol or any other drug, has now become part of the toolkit that people use to deal with life. And so that compulsive need to use drugs still needs to be addressed. And I think that resilience, it plays a big part in minimizing compulsive use, as you've described. And very simply, I say to people, it's the ability to say no. What do you think about that?
I think, yep. I think it's a good way of phrasing it. I often think about, so there are two types of cravings that people sort of identify. One is cue-related cravings, and one is stress-related cravings, right? And what we're talking
Yeah,
about is response to stress-related cravings. Slightly
yeah,
response to cue-related cravings as well, but really it's that when life
yeah,
is really
yeah,
hard and there's a stressor, there's a tragedy in your life, your
yeah,
brain's go-to, that compulsivity of substance use, is essentially you found an exogenous form of stress release. And I often think about
yeah.
it, when you go for a hike and the road
Sorry,
goes.
no, I don't actually, Richard. tell me,
Yeah,
tell me
fair
what
enough.
happens when you go for a
Yeah,
hike.
you wouldn't like it. You wouldn't like it. It's filled with healthy stuff. Um, and it surprises me. I would have thought you are a hiking person, Fergal, but fair enough.
Yeah,
Imagine you're on a hike, and the road goes. The path is a windy thing up the road, up the hill. But
yeah,
you'll see that people have just walked across the windy thing, up the narrow part to stop having to go around in a slow incline. They've just cut up a
yeah,
straight, and enough people have gone up that straight that there's now a new sort of unofficial path. I think
yeah,
using substance use as a form of exogenous stress release is exactly like that. Your brain's found a shortcut that works
yeah,
instantaneously, but is not helpful
yeah,
in the long run, much like
yeah,
cutting up through vegetation is not helpful for the forest. And it's about
yeah.
trying to retrain your brain to not use that shortcut, and use the sort of safer, slower path up.
Take the long, lonely road and watch all your friends have fun. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of people on the verge of recovery, and there's a number of themes that come out. And one of them is, how do I cope with the loss of my drug using peers? How do I cope with being alone on a Saturday night? that's where resilience comes into it. But there are things that we can do to help people through that. But that kind of the fear of social isolation, I think, is a reason why people don't embrace recovery, at least at first.
Yeah. That's even harder when it's a partner of yours that also is a substance user,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely. So I have four key pieces of advice that I discuss when I'm thinking about resilience. How do you actually develop it? So the first one is mastery. So the theory is that if you get good at one thing, you can use the halo effect to get good at something else. So if you're good at one thing, you set yourself up for in a mindset of success that allows you to then embrace recovery and be successful on that day. Because remember, when perhaps at the early stages, a good day in recovery is simply not having used when your head hits the pillow. No matter how terrible the day's been, if you haven't used, that's a good day. And I reflect on, I don't know if you ever watch YouTube videos of generals in the military talking about their days as a recruit and how their regimental sergeant major always made them get up at the same time every day, make their bed,
So just
do
to be
their
quick, you
exercise.
haven't gone hike. You don't go hiking, but you watch YouTube videos of army generals recounting their
Yes.
early training. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, well, well, that's vicarious mastery, which we will come to perhaps in the next episode. But and then of course they have to finish their day by washing their socks, right? And they say that set them up. That early success set them up for the rest of the day. So I encourage mastery in little small things, easy wins to set people up for the day. So, I mean, in terms of how you deal with recovery, how does it chime with you, if I may ask?
Yeah, I think it chimes really well, and it actually makes me think a lot about how some of the individualized advice I give. So if I'm dealing with someone with a substance use disorder or a severe anxiety or depression in the clinic, and they are quite fit, then the sort of mastery I recommend is often slightly cognitive. But if I'm dealing with someone who's quite unfit, the mastery I recommend is often quite slightly physical. So for someone slightly cognitive, why don't you read this short book? This is I often recommend Man's Search for Meaning because it's small and wonderful and everyone loves it. Or if there's someone who's not very fit, I say, well, let's go for a 5-minute walk or a 10-minute walk, and being able to achieve that and increase times. It's that sense of accomplishment that breeds more success and builds a sense of ability. It's sort of like the opposite of learned helplessness, if you think about it. It's
Absolutely, yeah,
learned
yeah.
helpfulness.
And I suppose it's a certain amount of stress tolerance, isn't it? Because when you think about the Yerkes-Dodson curve, that curve of increasing
Mhm.
stress increases performance up to a point where further stress decreases performance. I think that people with substance use disorders are actually beyond that tipping point, beyond that inflection point of the
Yeah.
Yerkes-Dodson curve, whereby they just cannot do anything that they're confronted with. Is simply too much, and they just collapse in a heap, or they revert back to their coping mechanism. Which, let's face it, drugs are a great coping mechanism because if they weren't, we'd both be out of a job.
That's it. I mean, people
But
people respond,
ha-
make rational decisions, don't they? And drugs
yeah,
are a good coping mechanism in the
so
short term,
this,
obviously.
yeah, obviously. So this gradual introduction of fairly, I don't want to say the word easy because for some people it's very difficult, but achievable goals, early achievable goals, setting yourself up, I think I think has the effect of correcting your position on that Yerkes-Dodson curve.
But actually, Fergal, it reminds me a bit of that. So that upside down U, that is the Yerkes-Dodson curve. There is a similar curve, same shape, created by a psychoanalyst called Pat Ogden, who's an American psychoanalyst, who described
Hmm.
the ideal amount of adversity in childhood to create a healthy sense of self. And if you have too
All right.
little adversity, you don't get that sense of achievement and be able to problem solve and don't get a formation of a sense of self. And you have too much, it's just trauma
Yeah.
and the exact same thing. You get a
Yeah.
self-distort. And I think what you are proposing there is that exact view of ideal
Yeah.
adversity.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And people say, "Oh, look, I wish I could be protected from the stresses and strains of life." You can't. And actually, that desire to never be challenged is actually a manifestation of your disease process, but also B, represents the ultimate form of avoidance. So you could argue that actually substance use is a form of avoidance. And avoidance in the long term, as much as we don't like it, avoidance is actually a counterproductive management strategy that actually in the longer term worsens distress.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
So it reinforces the fear that you're trying to escape.
Yeah. So I suppose really from a psychological point of view, to what extent does exposure therapy relate to this?
Um, well, I guess it's a form of exposure in terms of finding that ideal level of difficulty to the adversity.
Mm,
So I
yeah.
guess it is.
Yeah.
It's on the. I guess I often think with a lot of these things, you're talking about the same object and you're coming at it from a slightly different view. You know.
Mm, yeah. So I like your you're dividing the challenge, as it were, so from either cognitive or physical. And I've never heard of that before. So how long have you been doing that? Was that something you've come up with, or was that a theory that you read somewhere?
No, that's a Richard Bradlow
That's a
theory.
Richard
I think
Bradlow invention.
it was phrased. Came out of. I was never super athletic in school, and I had a period of my life when in my early 20s when I was unhappy, and I got very into athleticism, and I think that sense of achievement I felt really boosted my confidence and sort of unlearned that learned helplessness or learned
Exactly.
helpfulness, and
That's my
and it's
point
sort of
exactly.
and it was sort of born out of, I think clinically I've seen a lot of sort of not professional athletes, highly athletic men,
Mm,
where you say, do you go to the gym, and they look at you, like you're an idiot, because obviously they go to the gym, but they're still presenting with a very low sense of self-efficacy and low mood,
yeah.
high anxiety, or a substance use problem. So I've had to be more creative about what I've recommended to them to try and achieve that same level of self-efficacy and sort of learned helpfulness.
So you say self-efficacy, I say mastery. Tomato, tomato.
I will say mastery now. Sorry, Fergal.
No, self-efficacy is fine by me. I'm just simply saying that, I think we've come to the same point through different routes. Um, well, sadly, we've run out of time today, but I really do look forward to discussing further with you my 4 key interventions to develop resilience. But for now, Dr. Richard Bradlow, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
That's all for today, folks. My name's Dr. Ferghal Armstrong, and this has been Cracking Addiction.